I'd like to welcome you back. Today is a fantastic day for us, for our team. We have a guest today, Dr. John Haney. Now, he'll
Hello.
share more about his story. He'll share more about what he's gone through. But he is one of our therapists that helps facilitate our EMS weekend. He and his wife, Leslie, co-wrote Harboring Hope, which is an online course for betrayed spouses, both men and women. You can find that at affairrecovery.com. John is brilliant and has so much to give, particularly for the betrayed male spouse. And I've received comments from all over the world looking for someone that can make sense out of the betrayed male's story. Because as you've heard from me, there are nuances to the betrayed male's story. There absolutely are. But there are also some very similar commonalities to the recovery path, whether you're a male or a female. And John's going to touch on all of that today. I'm honored. I hope you're honored. I know that at the end of these videos, you're going to be extremely honored at the content that John provides. So thanks for tuning in today. For the viewing audience, why don't you share a little bit about your qualifications and what you do?
Okay, sure. So for about the last 15 years or so, I've been a therapist in private practice, a job that I absolutely love. And although we've worked with a lot of different kinds of issues, we primarily deal with infidelity almost exclusively now. I'm trained in sex therapy and some trauma methodologies like EMDR, and I'm getting trained in ETT right now, which we actually use with our infidelity. But that's our main focus right now. I've done a little bit of this and that. I started out in archaeology of all things, and that's not a particularly lucrative gig to get into. But I feel like I landed where I needed to be, and I absolutely love this work.
And you do this work because you're a survivor of infidelity yourself.
That's why I have a real passion for men and women who've been betrayed. And I have a passion for people who've been unfaithful too. But yes, it happened to me.
You know, one of the things that I say a lot to the viewers is unless somebody's been through it, and particularly a therapist, it's really hard for them to understand what it's like.
Absolutely.
And so many people who are hurting, broken, sure, angry as all get out, but desperate for help get mishandled.
Yes.
And I've had people for probably since we started this a couple of years ago crying out for a betrayed male spouse. So I couldn't think of anybody better, more qualified than you. Why don't you take just a couple of minutes and talk about what happened to you, how it happened to you, and then we'll continue with some thoughts on how to really help the betrayed male.
Well, it's been a long time for me since my first marriage collapsed, but sometimes it's even hard to get in touch with what I was feeling or thinking at that time now. But at the time, my then wife got into a very close and sudden affair with a guy who was a very close friend of mine, and our marriage didn't make it. And you know, one of the things I get asked sometimes is, had there been an EMS or something, would you have tried to do it? And I have to, say, in some ways, I'm grateful that I didn't have the opportunity to have to make the choice of what to do with it, because I think, we can talk more about this later, but I think one of the most agonizing things for men going through this is having to make a choice when they're not seeing a whole lot of movement, or they're not, while there's still, all kinds of societal and personal forces that are coming down on them. Just even having to make that decision was such an excruciating thing for so many guys that I didn't have to go through with that, because they ended up staying together and all that. So, and in some ways, I'm kind of grateful for that, because to this day, I don't know, had there been an EMS, would have I had either the courage or the integrity to go to it? I was pretty pissed off.
Absolutely. And I talked to many men and women, and we call it a double betrayal. That's what happened with Samantha and I. I had an affair with one of Samantha's closest friends who was in our home 3 to 4 days a week, and that was devastating for her to be betrayed by someone so close. It wasn't just a random person. And I would tell you that I think it happens, I would say a betterment of at least 50-50, that when the male spouse is betrayed, close to 50% of the time it's with someone they know or even a very close friend. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that happens a lot. We hear that sadly over and over again, that the person that's cultivating the emotional intimacy with the wife is someone close in.
Right. So to get into kind of the nitty-gritty And when I have guests of your caliber, I always like to ask the tough questions because I feel like so many people who are hurting and broken are looking for answers. I'm humbled to just give them my story, but to bring in, someone who has experience, who now specializes in this, I'm going to ask you some of the tough questions because there's dare I say hundreds and thousands of people looking for these kind of answers. So
Fire away.
why don't you take a couple minutes and explain some of the unique challenges that the betrayed male experiences?
Yeah, I think probably the first thing I'd want to say is recognizing that while infidelity is universally painful, whether you're a woman or a man experiencing it, it's still a different animal when it happens to guys. And not saying that it's more painful per se, but the
Right.
pain is different
Mhm.
and the healing trajectory is different. And I
Yep.
think a lot of the experiences of what men feel like they're expected to do in response to it tends to be different from what a lot of betrayed women feel like their response is supposed to be.
And that's a brilliant statement of you alluded to what they're expected to do, right? Because
Yes.
there's such this heavy amount of expectations on they should do this.
Right. Absolutely. And in fact, I think that's one of the things that comes up most frequently. There's a lot of adjectives that I hear again and again that men use to describe this experience, and a big one is impotence. Like, and specifically around not the sexual impotence, but impotence of action. That most guys feel like when there's a problem, just tell me what the directions are for the solution, I'll go ahead and do it. It's like it demands action
Right.
of some sort. And in this case, it can be doubly frustrating because A, they don't know what actions to take, and B, even when they do try to take actions that directly do what they think is addressing the relationship, it actually tends to have a boomerang effect and do the opposite. And we could talk more about why that is, but like that's why it's so frustrating, because they just don't feel like there's anything they can do, or if they feel like they have a direction to go, it doesn't work out the way they thought they would. And that feeds a lot of the frustration. You mentioned other counselors and friends and pastors and things will sometimes give advice. Unfortunately, because most of them don't really know the dynamics,
Right.
particularly of male infidelity,
Right.
when the male is the betrayed, the advice they tend to give actually is not only counterproductive, it's destructive. For example, like I can't tell you how many guys who were told that if their wife is checked out, and are ambivalent or having an affair, that they need to double down on their love.
Right.
I hear it all the time. It's like, do the love dare.
Yeah.
Just do the love dare, see that through. And I'm not knocking the love dare. I mean,
Absolutely.
there's plenty of places where that's a good application.
On a general situation, I've done it. I love the love dare, but it wasn't about infidelity.
Right.
It was just another tool. But this is the ace of spades. I mean, when you're dealing with infidelity, I think you would probably agree, at the top of the trauma scale. So to think that you're going to throw some general little kind of thing at it is going to be, to use another word, impotent for the type of trauma and the shame.
Totally. That's exactly it. When women check out of relationships, they tend to emotionally disengage from the relationship.
Right.
And they can get just cold as ice. And I think that's one of the hardest challenges for guys, is they're not only seeing, they're dealing with their own hurt, but they're doing it in the face of what looks like just outright hostility on the part of, and otherwise this loving, nurturing woman they thought they were married to can just suddenly become an iceberg. And even at EMS, we see it sometimes. You get all these unfaithful men in the room, and a lot of them are like bending over backwards doing whatever it takes to make it right.
Right.
And the women are just sitting over there, because they're just not there yet. And so one of the worst things that can happen, and unfortunately a lot of pastors and counselors will tell guys to try to just win their wives back, but when they're that detached, it tends to have a more of a repellent effect. There's a model called hitting the wrong side of the ambivalence. If ambivalence is a woman not knowing whether she wants to be in the relationship or not, the general rule is the more you try to press towards them, the more it pushes them away. In Harboring Hope, I use the analogy of, it's like a couple of magnets. When a relationship's in a healthy place, it's like the force of the magnets brings them together.
Right.
But when a woman goes ambivalent, it's like one of those magnets flips around, and so the more you try to push towards them, it just pushes them away.
It makes total
sense.
And so,
the devastation and rejection that a guy is already feeling just then gets doubled down on, because they're feeling even more rejection. I'm being everything you told me you wanted me to be, and you're hating me for it. And the other side of that, and part of the reason for that is too, that a lot of guys I don't think understand. Oftentimes women who otherwise are conscientious and loving and people of some moral character, they're wrestling too with what they're doing.
Right.
And sometimes not even on a conscious level, sometimes it can be more unconscious. as a result, they need to, in their own brain, sanitize what they're doing somehow. And so they tend to create this revisionist story of the whole marriage that
Right.
he never loved me. I married the wrong man. He was never emotionally present enough. He's a rageaholic. And some of those elements may be based in a grain of truth,
Sure.
or even a lot of truth in some cases. But they'll take every negative thing and blow them up, and they'll take every good thing about the relationship and diminish it.
Right.
And so in their own head, they've created this new story about the relationship. And so what happens, it's like they need their friends and family members, and they certainly need the betrayed spouse to play into that narrative. And so if a woman's convinced herself that her husband's just this uncaring, emotionless monster, then she'll get actually angry with him if he actually shows some compassion or kindness
Really.
or tenderness, because it's not playing along with the narrative in her head.
Really.
And so a lot of guys will press in trying to be just really kind and loving, and they'll get damned for it. They'll get,
Really.
it creates even more spite in many cases. And so it leaves them feeling completely frustrated.
I think that hits the nail right on the head, because there's so many men who experience that dynamic. So, I mean, I don't want to jump ahead, but I want to jump ahead. So what do you do as a man who's been betrayed in that scenario? You're the magnet, and you feel like you're chasing them away, and
Right.
nothing works. So what, for that scenario, what would you suggest?
Strangely, it's almost like in a way you have to disengage to have a chance of re-engaging.
Really?
But that goes counterintuitive to what most men have been taught, or what they're thinking, or what their pastor or their marriage counselor is telling them to
Right.
do. So you have to create space for the healing of both parties. We say with AR, there's 3 healing trajectories. There's mine, there's yours, and then there's ours as a couple.
Right.
And of course, the one that gets ignored the most is the betrayed partners, and,
Yeah.
and we talk about that sometimes. But so often what happens is a guy is just putting all his energy into getting his wife to come home, or to save the marriage, or double down on making sure that she's going to be there for the kids. It's all these practical kind of marital concerns or relational concerns, and their own needs. Not only do they get ignored, but even when they try to turn some attention to them, they don't always know what to do with those emotions.
Right.
We can talk more about that too. But like, so much of the problem is you have to create a degree of space, while knowing that the space you're creating for your wife, that she's not just completely going off the reservation in that space and doing her own thing.
Yeah.
Which is often exactly what they want to do. They want to have the running room to go do their thing and all of that. So, how do I keep a degree of accountability for what she's doing, while disengaging enough where we're not just, smothering the chance of.
Because that's exactly right. I talk to many men who I'll say, listen, you've got to pull back and leave room for them to choose you. Because if you're chasing them, you're going to have to end up chasing them the rest of the marriage if the marriage is restored.
Right.
But I'm going to win her back. I'm going to show her that I am the man that she so desperately wants. Would you agree that's valiant? It is.
Absolutely it is.
But it's not helpful.
Yes.
Most of the time.
Even if the guy is doing everything that he feels like he's supposed to do to win her back,
Right.
if he hasn't really addressed his own emotional needs, they tend to come descending on them in a really profound way later, and sometimes a really dark way. And what I mean by that, let's just say suddenly 6 months after all this broke, or a year, because it could take a lot longer than 6 months, as you know, and they've just been fighting and doing everything to be Mr. Perfect. What happens sometimes is finally she says, okay, I'm in. And at that point, though, a lot of guys will hit this moment where, like, okay, the immediate crisis has passed.
Right.
I've restored the family unit here, but then they'll start asking, what have I really won here? Because only then will the anger and the rage and they'll sometimes ask this question, what have I really won with this?
Yeah. It's kind of like delayed anger.
Yes. Because
it's
and
not
delayed
processed.
grief
Yeah.
and delayed,
You hit the nail right on the head. Delayed grief.
Yes, because they never really got a chance to process what happened. And so they're looking at this woman now who they've been fighting for, and they see this woman lying next to them in their bed at night.
Right.
And they're going, I don't know if I really love her. I don't know if I'm attracted to her.
Wow.
Because it can so shut down our desire, because once we get them, it can suddenly feel like a consolation prize almost, or a.
So good. So you've got them back, and now there's, in kind of super layman's terms, there's this unresolved grief,
Yes.
anger. It's kind of like they've been so focused on winning them back
or protecting the kids, or
right, stabilizing things.
Mhm.
Now the unfaithful female is back, and it's like, I thought this would feel great, but because they made the unfaithful female more of a priority than their own healing, right? Now they're conflicted. So for the gentlemen that are out there in that moment, conflicted, like, wait a minute, like I had such higher hopes, or maybe the unfaithful female has never really come back to a great place of, because I see that a lot. They'll come
yes,
back and it's still muddy.
exactly, and sometimes we'll try to force into that too quickly too. We'll try to get our sexual relationship back, or
Right.
we'll try to just do what we call pretend normal, and
Mm-hmm.
they are, and that can be really destructive, because like even physical intimacy, if her heart's not in it yet, it can feel like you're with a blow up doll or a bag of potatoes. It's like
Right.
they're and that can feel rejecting again. Okay, yes, we've restored some physical intimacy, which on one level feels like a barometer of connection, even though it isn't always. On the other hand, it makes me feel even more isolated, because now it just feels like she's there, but she's not there, and she's not communicating that she really wants to be here, either sexually or emotionally, or
Right.
and so sometimes they'll get pleasant again, they'll get workable again, where they're talking to you, engaging with you, but the heart's still not in it. And
Right.
so it's like it can be like living with a robot. But even in cases where they come all in, the guy's often not there yet, because he's finally having some space to look at all what this has done to me.
Right.
What not just is what it's done to our relationship, what I thought we had in our marriage, but what it's done to my sense of my masculinity, my sense of my sexuality, my identity as a man.
So right. So in that moment, it's kind of like at that moment, then the male struggles with so much comparison to the affair partner. And we don't need to get into graphic details, but there is such a sense of comparison.
Yes.
What does that guy do to kind of bring part one to a bit of a close? What does that gentleman do he's everything that you just described. And I talk to someone like that every week. Every couple of days. I know you see him in your office every day. How do you help that gentleman? How do you help that dynamic find relief?
Yeah, and first I think it's like making the space to heal again before you start pressing in too quickly. I think, in some cases you almost have to learn how to exist as friends and roommates again before you start pressing in too much, making it safe for intimacy again, any kind of intimacy. But I think specifically when we're talking about the sexual intimacy, that's one of the hardest things for guys. We can be so visual, and
Right.
sometimes, we talk about double binds in psychology, where you're trying to process contradictory things at the same time, contradictory emotions or contradictory thoughts. And this kind of double binds is a killer, because on the one hand, sex or any kind of emotional or physical connection can feel like closeness, but it can also be one of the most horrific reminders of what they did with the other guy, or the other guys, as the case may be. And so we can be feeling this gratitude and this connection, and suddenly this intrusive thought will come crashing in, and boys, like Elvis has left the building at that point. It's like, it can just totally shut a guy down in
Right.
terms of performance, in terms of will to want, desire of wanting to be with the other person. It can absolutely shut them down. So as much as we're wanting to connect again, and when we start seeing little signs of life, our natural tendency is to jump on it and be so grateful for it. But we find out that not only are they not fully back, we're not fully back.
Yeah.
And so just trying to discern that space and make room for it, that's tough stuff. And I think
And it's complicated more when the unfaithful female, and this we can talk about this for hours, when the unfaithful female says, I don't want to talk about it. We're not
Right.
going to do that. Look, it's over. I'm home. You should just be happy. We're good. And here's the betrayed male who, due to society and the norm and the culture, is supposed to be, I am strong. Okay, I will buck up and move on down. You can't.
Right.
This is real trauma, right?
Indeed it is. As we're trying to move close to them too, I think one of the critical things is, as we're trying to make sense of what they did, for understanding what it is and what it wasn't. We often will immediately draw unfavorable comparisons, that what did he have that I didn't have? What was he doing sexually with her that I wasn't doing? And it's not about that. In fact,
You probably need to say that about 30 times, that it's not about that. So
no, in fact, the one thing I do try to hammer with my guys is, like, it really isn't about you. Yes, we can look back on our marriage and find 1,000 places we could have done it better. I'm married to a marriage counselor, and and like, I can think about 100 things yesterday
Right.
that I could have done better, but not blaming that for the infidelity or trying to understand. Now, the woman very often in her guilt will try to jump on that and use that, but we really try to set the message that it's not about them. And not only, it's not either about, going back to what I was saying a moment ago, it's not what the other guy had that I didn't have. Because I think that's one of the most tragic things I see is that we will draw comparisons. And we talk sometimes about how women tend to affair down. And so what we'll see is we'll see this guy that she's having an affair with. We're going like, what the, and if he picked or she picked him
Right.
instead of me, what, I must be like the loser of the century because this guy is like,
Right.
want people to understand is it's not about the qualities necessarily that the person's bringing to the table. It's more about the validation bounce that they get. And what I mean, it's like we talk so much with infidelity. One of the big driving dynamics with infidelity is validation, right? And you know that. I mean, so what happens when a woman's feeling inadequate herself, or she feels like she's not getting enough attention or enough notice or whatever, they tend to aim really low because the lower they aim, the more that guy's going to have to look up to them. And so they really scrape the bottom of the barrel sometimes. Rick and I could just go on and on about, we've seen women have affairs with, convicted sex offenders, with homeless guys, with, abusers who are just horrible to them. And it makes no sense at face value that if we're looking at it from that social myth that that they're looking for something they didn't have in a relationship necessarily. I mean, I wish we could do a photo shoot of like all the guys who've been cheated on and then the affair partners, because it would blow your mind.
Wow.
I mean, you see all these like really put together, attractive, professional guys who are great fathers and all of that, and so many of the pictures of the affair partners. I mean, it's like looks like a dude that she picked up at a bus station in Chernobyl or something. It's like it's crazy. But they do it because, or so often, the guy that's really the fix-up project is going to feed that need to be needed, or he's going to feed that almost need to be worshipped. That the lower down he is, the more he's going to look up to her and see her as just this angel and this unattainable beauty. Whereas my husband hasn't necessarily been doing that, and so they're looking for the main line of the validation. And so they often shoot really, really low to get that. And so to the guys who might listen to this, I would say, don't draw that comparison because it's apples to oranges. It's not about what you were lacking. If, we say it's not about, the void in you, it's about the void they felt in themselves, what they were trying to medicate. And they often go to just sometimes absurd looking lengths. It doesn't make sense when you look at it rationally sometimes. But so often though, guys, that's probably one of my biggest concerns is what this does to their identity, that I must be just the loser of the century.